All right. Welcome to episode 2 of the Two Thinking Apes. So today we've got Alyssa, who's the youngest Australian to climb Mount Everest, but you've also done a lot of other amazing things. We had a quick bit of research on you before we decided to reach out to you. So welcome to the podcast.
That's right. Thank you for having me on.
So the main thing I had was, look, first of all, how did you even get into mountain climbing? So you got into it at a really young age, and
I did, yeah.
like,
So it
You want to
kind of
start from the
started,
beginning?
yeah, if you want, can go right back. But
Yeah.
I guess the sort of entry point to that world of adventure for me was right back when I was about 6. So I grew up in Toowoomba, just small country town, pretty small family. So I had a very normal life in a lot of ways, but was always very active, loved doing a lot of different sports. But my father was in the army at the time and he was getting into doing some guiding. So he was taking people just part time across the Kokoda track in Papua New Guinea. So I used to hear a lot about Kokoda. I was naturally quite adventurous myself. I was always interested in it from a distance, but that was sort of the connection to it. So he would train people up to go to Kokoda. And I used to join in on those training sessions. So most of my weekends, quite young, was spent like out bushwalking with a pack on just in the hills locally. And I did that for a while and then sort of had the idea in my head quite young that maybe I could do Kokoda one day and I'd love to experience this place that I've heard so much about. It just fascinated me. And naturally, at the time, I was pretty small, and he said, "No way!" But in a few years,
How
you
old
can
were you
go.
at the time?
I really wanted to do it when I was about 6, 7 years old. And I just harassed him about it, and he's
What were
like,
you doing at
"Absolutely
I was
6?
not."
playing with I was playing with Star Wars Legos.
Yeah, he was like, "No way." But I was obsessed with it, loved it, and I was just like, "All right, well, I'll just keep training until eventually someday I get to go." And I remember when I was about 7, I was still pestering him, and he came back from a trip, and he was like, "All right, if you really want to go, I will give you the opportunity, but you have to train for a year." And you'll have a certain amount of sessions each week that you have to stick to. You have to be consistent. And if I feel like you're not working hard enough to go to Kokoda, then you won't get the opportunity
What
to
did those
go.
sessions involve?
Yeah, I was gonna say, what's the training for like this?
Yeah, so I would do 3 gym sessions a week. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday after school for an hour. They would be like circuit style training. So general fitness, would be a lot of running. We'd do some boxing as well, strength sort of stuff, a lot of body weight strength,
Yeah.
just like core push ups, things like that. And then on the weekends, would be pack walks again, but now I knew I was going to Kokoda, so it was a lot more intense. I had to do like 3 hours at a time, sometimes out on the hills, building up a lot of endurance because that's
Yeah.
mainly what it is. And then the general fitness throughout the week. But did that for a year and then got the opportunity to go to Kokoda in 2005. And we spent, 8 days trekking through the jungles of Papua New Guinea. And I was
Wow.
the youngest person across the track at the time. I was 8.
Jeez.
And pretty tiny. But, that was a huge thing for me to complete a year of training. It gave me a real understanding of how to set a goal and work back from it and the process that's involved. But
Especially
yeah,
from
that's
such a
kind of
young age, that would have like set your trajectory up. Did that
100%. Yeah.
spark in you that kind of ambition to continue pursuing those kinds of things from that first like
It
trek?
definitely did. Yeah, it definitely did. I mean, I always sort of had that there, but this showed me a way to actually bring that out and to actually be able to pursue the goals that I had. So, yeah, I think it was really important to teach me like I can have this dream or vision, but this is the reality of what's involved on a day to day basis. And this is how consistent you have to be. And yeah, but it definitely made me feel like, well, now I can apply that to anything else that I want to do. So it was quite empowering. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it set up a good work ethic, especially doing it so young. Like you'd carry that across to anything.
Did you
You
have
do.
to do a
You have
diet
that
as
frame
well?
of reference. Yeah, not so much. Like you do need to eat relatively healthy. And over the years, as my goals have gotten bigger, it's become more strict where you
Okay.
will eat very much like an athlete. But when I was younger, not so much. It's more of a mental thing when you're doing adventures and all that sort of thing. You do have to be really fit, but it is a mental game once you get over there. So you don't have
How
to
big
be.
was your group for Kokoda?
So we kind of had a smaller group that was part of a bigger team. So there were about 20 as part of that bigger team, but we kind of just trekked with like 4 of us.
Yeah.
So we had a smaller group of us that went because we had all
How did
trained
you
together.
How did you find Kokoda as an, because I've heard
We've
like,
got a friend who did
he,
Kokoda.
yeah, and he was like complaining about, like, not complaining, like it was
He
great,
was complaining.
but he was complaining about how difficult it was. And like, you're right, like, were there any points in that where you were thinking to yourself, oh, I'm not going to be able to get the whole way? Or were you pretty good because that year of training? Well, our friend didn't train at all, so it probably explains it, but.
Yeah, that would. I think, look, the first day was definitely the most challenging because I think there's a lot of nerves, there's a lot of expectation. You don't really know what you're walking into. And so I found the first day really tough because also the heat of the jungle was like the worst it was on the first day. So there's definitely points where you start questioning, what have I gotten myself into, for sure.
Yeah.
But after that, I sort of came good, and you do learn to get your rhythm and you get into it a little bit. So there's definitely points. It's a really, really tough trek. So you do sort of question it. But I think that year of training did set me up really well. And I think also just from a mental standpoint, I walked into it with so much respect for this challenge. It wasn't like, oh, I'll just go to Kokoda. I think the people around me had really set me up for that. But yeah, there's definitely, it is a tough trek, and there's times where you'll just be going up steep hill for like 2 hours at a time, and it doesn't seem to come to any sort of an end.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was definitely tough.
So after Kokoda, you got a taste, and then what was next for you? What age are you doing these next things? What's like the
So
timeline of that life?
yeah, a couple of years later was my next challenge. So took a year off, I certainly missed that, having that goal and that sense of adventure.
What year were you
But
as well at school at this point?
so I was in grade 4 when I did Kokoda. So grade 4, grade 5 when I
Did
got
your friends
back.
understand what you had just done?
Not really.
I was gonna
It's
say.
funny though. I remember at school, my teacher in grade 4 had a map of Kokoda in the classroom, and she would put up a little pinpoint as I got to each location, and they would sort of
That's
follow
nice.
it along. But no, the kids didn't really understand what it meant or what it was. Or anything like that. So for me, it was almost having this different worlds. I had
It
my
would have
school
been
life.
like two separate worlds.
It was, yeah. It was like my school life with just my normal friends, and then I had this world of, Kokoda and jungles and adventure and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I had these 2 separate parts of my life. And but yeah, after Kokoda, it was about a year, and then I started thinking, oh, maybe there's something else I could do in the future as well. And I found out initially I wanted to do Mount Kilimanjaro. But I found out that there was an age limit on that, and I missed it by
Really?
like 4 years. At the time, they've lowered it now, but I think you had to be at least 14 before you could attempt it.
Okay, so you had a couple years of training before you
Yeah.
could get there.
Yeah. So what I ended up doing is I went to my dad and said, oh, is there another like trek we could do? I really want to do another one at some point, start planning that. And he said, oh, look, do your research, and if there's something you want to do. So Kili was out of the question, but I then found out about Everest Base Camp, and that became the next challenge. So same deal, though. I had to do the year of training leading up to it. This was going to be more challenging than Kokoda because of the altitude. But again, it really taught me that process. I had to sit there, I had to set the goal, work back from it. All right, what's all the stuff that goes into this? Am I willing to put that work in? So I did that over the course of a year. And then when I was 10, I got to fly to Nepal and trek to Everest Base Camp, which was just a pretty surreal experience.
It would have been. We've talked about going to base camp, but
it's, to this day, one of the best trips I've ever done. I just love that place. Yeah. So had a group of Australians with us. There were about 8 of us, and then we flew into Kathmandu in Nepal, which is just crazy, but it's a pretty interesting city. And then you fly to a smaller village in the foothills of the Himalaya called Lukla, which is already higher than any point in Australia. And you're above 3,000 meters above sea level just there, and you already start to feel the lack of oxygen. And then you've got a 14-day trek up to the base camp. But pretty much on day 2, you can see Everest. So I got to see Everest for the first time when I was 10. And as you get higher up, you go through these Sherpa villages and you get to see some of the highest mountains in the world. Are
they as nice as they are portrayed in documentaries? And
they're the loveliest people. They're exactly like that. They're just very welcoming. They have a pretty amazing culture like that. And I've certainly gotten to know a few of them over the years, and so like being on expeditions and that as well. But like we trek through their villages and the places they went to school and all that sort of thing. But yeah, they're very much like they are portrayed for sure.
Yeah. So would you be in year 6 at this point?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did you have to take leave off school, or like, because you need to go at certain time periods of the year, don't you, for Everest?
That's right. So, with Kokoda, it was a little bit easier. As the trip started getting longer, that became more challenging. So Everest Base Camp is 3 weeks, a bit over actually. So that was definitely challenging. I had to try and get ahead on work before I went away, and then anything I couldn't get done would have to get done when I got back. So playing catch up, and obviously if you can schedule it on holidays, you would. But yeah, a lot of these trips are seasonal, so you just can't.
Yeah.
So there's, a good time to go, and that's when we went. So it was definitely becoming challenging to try and balance the treks and all of that with school, even at that point.
Did your marks or anything, or did it suffer at all, or were you going with the same attitude to your study as you were with your climbing and just working real hard and not doing much else?
Something would have to sacrifice eventually.
Yes, absolutely. So at that point, I was pretty much balancing them both pretty well. But over the next few years, I definitely had to choose, which was quite challenging, and I couldn't, give the same amount of time and energy to both. But when I went to base camp, it was still manageable. I was putting the same effort.
Wouldn't be that hard.
Yeah, that's right. But certainly as I started to get into high school and all that sort of thing, and the expeditions were getting bigger and bigger, and I had to be away for long periods of time, that became a lot more challenging, and I did essentially have to choose what path I was going to go down. Yeah.
So on that, we'll fast track a little bit then. I want to go back to it, but the question that I have is there's obviously societal pressure to be you go to uni, that kind of thing. You finish your high school, you focus on your study, you go to uni, you get a job in that field.
Classic circle. Which is what we're doing right now. But
that's why we want to try and mix it up a bit, try and do something different, try and figure ourselves out a bit. So what was it, because you started so young that path was never really, you didn't feel that societal pressure, or
did you feel the societal pressure, and how did you deal with it?
Look, I still did, certainly. And I came to a crossroads where it was a really difficult decision. Outside of my father, no one else in my family is adventurous. They all work pretty normal jobs and did that path, uni degrees and things like that. So I think they were concerned. They didn't want me to go all in at something that, has this massive uncontrollable component to it, and to not get the formal education. And that was certainly a risk. Like I said, I felt that pressure, but I was so passionate about what I was doing. And I think the biggest strength I gained from a lot of these trips and getting into mountaineering is you have to learn to trust your own intuition. No one's, particularly when you're walking a very unique path, there's no one there to say whether that's right or wrong. You have to trust your own instincts a lot of the time, and you get some advice, but not really. You've got to be willing to sort of take it and run with it. And that's what I did. And I thought, okay, worst case scenario, this doesn't pan out. Am I okay with worst case scenario? Am I happy to come back and go, all right, I gave that a crack, it didn't work. Now what can I go and do? So I think there was still nerves around it. It was a big risk. But I ultimately decided, this opportunity doesn't come around often. I've been working at this to try and get to a really high level for most of my life. I want to see if I'm capable of that, and I think it'll be worth it. But yeah, I definitely felt that for sure.
So what age did you come at that crossroads?
I was about 14. So when I was 14, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. And at the time, that was the biggest trip I'd ever done. It's the highest altitude I'd ever been to. And I did that whole training process again, put a year of work in. But that was a really important trip for me because it's actually where I decided I'm going to climb Mount Everest. And that had always been in the back of my mind as something I knew I was going to do it at some point in my life. But that's the time when I went, okay, I'm actually going to pursue this. And, I remember feeling quite frustrated at the time with, just life and my life at school and that sort of thing. I knew I probably wasn't going to take a normal path and I had to really be active about pursuing something that I wanted to do. So ultimately pretty much got home from Kilimanjaro and went, I'm going to go all in at what I'm doing. And that became my total focus. But yeah, it was a risky decision because I knew I am going to have to make a lot of sacrifices in order to do that. But there was something about it that I just felt like was the right path for me.
Were there any positive reactions other than your father, who you said had that adventurous spirit?
It would have been good that your dad had the adventurous spirit, because I know my parents throughout all of school, just classic Greek parents, and also his.
Yeah, wogs.
We're just going, you have to get a uni degree. If you don't get a uni degree, you're done. Like, not that intense, but sort of that intense.
There's that subconscious path of there's no other option. So it's interesting to see another option.
Yeah, because we just got told, get your uni degree first and then do whatever you want, and then you can always fall back on it. And that was the pressure on, like, for me, that was a massive pressure. Even my grandparents were getting on it. So it's just, it's interesting from us. And
so aside from your father, when you made, was it like a sit down conversation you had with people?
There was actually. So when I got back from Kilimanjaro, this had been in my head for a while, and I sat down with him and said, I want to climb Mount Everest. And, this is sort of typical of him and his reactions is he never, whenever I had a goal or something that I wanted to do, he didn't shut it down or why would you do that? Or no, don't do that. He just would go, all right, well, what would that involve? You need to think through the impact that that's going to have and all that sort of thing. So, but he never, sort of shut down the things that I wanted to do, which was quite unique because a lot of people around outside of that were very much like, no, you should follow that traditional
especially
path.
As a 14-year-old, they'd probably think you don't know what you're thinking.
No, 100%. And I had so many people just go, oh, okay, you're going to climb Mount Everest. They think you can't have any context around what that is. But, I'd performed quite well on a lot of the trips that I'd had. But I'm pretty sure there were a lot of times where only he and I believed that I was actually capable of doing it. And I actually remember going over there for the first time after I'd trained up for it and everything. And people were actually surprised that I was going. I don't think they thought this was real. But, he knew how dedicated I was to any process I'd set my mind to previously. But there was a lot of uncertainty and unknown in my life at that time when I was starting.
It would have been a massive mental strain if everyone was like, oh, sure, you'll climb Mount Everest. And then you're like, no, I'm climbing Mount Everest. And then it would have been heaps emotional when you actually got there after all that training and saw it and go, I'm going to climb Mount Everest. And everyone's just
it would have been like a massive fuck you.
It feels good. Yeah, because I think they're sort of like, oh, it's all talk or whatever, or maybe it's an attention grab or something like that, particularly with, trying to be the youngest and all that sort of thing. But I believed I had what it took, and I was willing to find the people I needed to be around to help train me up for that. The way I looked at it, I knew I had a lot of work to do when I set that goal. I was a long way from being able to climb Everest, but I thought, I don't think there's anyone who's done it that's willing to train harder than me, who's willing to work harder than me. I don't believe they want it more than I do. So for that reason, decided to pursue it, but didn't really know how that was going to play out over the next few years.
Do you reckon if you didn't have the support of your father, you'd still be where you are today?
No, not at all. I think, I maybe would have done a lot of that stuff, but probably a lot later. It was because of his belief in me. I mean, I don't see how I would have pulled it together if there wasn't
Yeah,
at least that
especially
one
an eight.
person.
And he would have been
Yeah.
heaps candid about everything as well, which would have helped because it was constructive and he was also facilitating it. So
That's right. Yeah,
it's
that's right. So he always said right back from Kokoda, he's like, I never paved the way for her, but I didn't stop her either. So he was deliberate about, yeah, if you want to do this, I'll support you in any way I can, connect you with the right people, help you with your training, but I can't do it for you. I'm not going to remove obstacles out of your way because that's part of it. So he was really good with that balance, I think, of like, I'm not going to crush what you want to do, but I'm also not going to make it easier and that standard was set right back from Kokoda. I had to, not go, well, I'm an 8-year-old girl. It's like, well, this is the requirements of what you want to do. So you have to get yourself up to that standard in order to, achieve it and get to go and do that. So that set me up well mentally for Everest because I didn't go, oh, but I'm a teenage girl. I went, well, I want to be an Everest summiteer. So what does that involve and what do I have to do and who do I have to be? And I have to have the same standard as anyone else who's done it. And I believed I could, but there were plenty of moments where you question that belief or you don't always get it right or, it was quite a process over the next few years.
So after Kilimanjaro, was that Everest next?
So I set the goal of Everest, but we initially planned, approximately 3 years from when I started prepping for it. And I had to obviously do trips where I could in between that. So most of my time was spent like physically training at home. And then here and there, I'd get to go away on trips. So I went to the 8th highest mountain in the world over in Nepal, and I did an expedition there to test my training to see if I was improving. You've got to really put yourself under pressure to know that.
Yeah.
And progressively over the next few years was improving. And then when I was 17, I had my final expedition after 3 years of physical training. I went to the Andes Mountains and climbed the highest mountain over in the Andes, which was one of the toughest climbs I've ever done.
How long
Really
did that
tough.
take?
So it was about 3 weeks. But, the Andes is just really volatile weather. And this mountain was also the highest altitude I'd ever been to at the time. It was close to 7,000 meters.
Yeah.
So it was really a test of, being on a tough expedition, being at high altitude, how do you perform? And the idea was I was climbing with the same team that I would potentially be climbing with Everest. So the idea was for them to see how I perform because I was so young. I think they wanted to test that. So I was only 17 after I did that climb. And then it was almost a bit of a selection in a way. If I performed on that, then I could go to Everest was the idea.
So had the people in that group already done Everest?
So all of the guides had, but not any of the other team members.
Okay.
So they were like me. Some just wanted to do this mountain, and then others had a goal of eventually getting to Everest as well. So I joined on with the aim of climbing Everest, and we had 3 expedition guides, all of whom had climbed Everest. So they knew the standard, they knew what it took. And that was the whole idea, is I was going to get honest feedback about whether I could stack up to climbing Everest.
What was the
so
feedback?
yeah,
Obviously, yes, but did
no,
you go into
really
detail?
positive. Really positive. So I was pretty happy with how I performed. I felt really strong, a lot stronger than I thought I would at altitude, because you just don't know how your body's going to react. We had a really long, tough summit night, but they were happy with it and said, yeah, if you want to come to Everest, you can join the team. And literally a couple months later, I was on my first expedition to Mount Everest.
How was the altitude sickness as well? Did you get sick?
So I didn't get, it's pretty normal. Everyone gets headaches. Altitude is brutal for sure. And as you get higher up, it's just harder to do really basic things. So it's hard to eat. It's hard to sleep. You've really got to try and conserve your energy when you're not climbing. But yeah, you'll often feel just like constant throbbing in the back of your head because of the altitude and the pressures. But I was lucky I didn't get sick. Sometimes you do, but it's, I've had it quite rarely. It's so dependent on a lot of factors, but we have had team members get sick and things like that. So I've definitely seen it up close and personal, what it can do.
Yeah, with Everest, I've always seen and heard about the like omnicity of the ice fall at is just
Mhm.
after base camp. Is that the hardest bit of the climb just because of how unpredictable that is? And is that something you complete before the sun comes up because it melts, or like how do you find
Correct.
that? Because all I see is ladders across massive just falls into just nothing.
Yeah, so I'd say equally, there's two parts of the climb that are probably the toughest and the scariest. It's the Kombu Icefall and then summit day when you're in the death zone. So the Kombu Icefall, like you said, is the very, very first section. Literally, as you leave base camp, you're starting to climb up through that, and it's all those ladders that are tied together and that sort of thing, and you're crossing these deep crevasses. Yeah, so we'll always leave at like 2 o'clock in the morning when it's pitch black. The idea being that it's coldest, so it's going to give us more of a chance to get through there. No one wants to be in there in the middle of the day. And as you start to acclimatize, you move through there faster, which is good because you don't want to be in there for long. But it's so unpredictable. It's quite a scary section to be in, and I actually remember climbing through there once when I was on my summit push. Of Everest, and we were climbing through there and it's pitch black and all I can see is where my head torch is pointing to put my next step. And in the space of like 30 minutes, three big avalanches went off and we could hear them, but we couldn't see them. So I don't know where they're coming from, if we're in that path. It is, once you're in there, you have no control over the situation, and all you can do is just be really efficient while you're in there. But it's a pretty scary place to be in the ice fall.
Far out. From my understanding, I might be wrong, because for climbing, isn't it you've got to go up to a camp, then you got to go back down to acclimatize? Isn't that I don't know, I haven't done it, but isn't that frustrating? Because like
It
you just
is.
it's like
It is.
inches, you know what I mean?
It is. It mentally, that's the biggest thing it'll mentally get to you, because there's sections that you've got to climb more than once, and you're like, I've done this before.
Yeah.
So it's just how expedition style climbing is. But there are times where, yeah, you do get sick of having to go up and back, up and back. Some people will try and like, because they call them rotations up the mountains. You'll do 2 or 3 rotations before you actually go to climb it. And so some people will go and climb another peak as part of one of their rotations so that it's not as repetitive. But you've still got to do it at least once before you go up. So it can get quite frustrating. Part of the reason we also do it is acclimatization, but you've got to stock the higher camps for your summit push. So you'll take gear up, leave some stuff there, come back down, and you've got to continuously do that. But yeah, I remember doing a really tough day from base camp to camp 2 directly, which was like 12 hours, and it was tough.
God.
And I remember having to do it a second time and knowing we had to go and do it again. And there were a few of us that were just like, that was a really brutal day and we know we're doing it again.
Yeah.
So it mentally wears on you for sure.
Is there ever that fear that you're getting to wherever you set up and like there was a blizzard or an avalanche or something and everything you set up's not there?
Yeah, that would be one
Does
of the
that
worst
actually
case
happen?
scenarios, because it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. There's times where people will go up there and their tent's been destroyed or, stuff like that, and you just have to come back down and regroup and replan sort of thing. But most of the time we're pretty good at, you'll either collapse stuff and bury it a certain way with coordinates and all that sort of thing. We've got these pretty heavy duty like barrels that are expedition barrels that will put them in and stuff like that. But sometimes, yeah, the weather wins and it just happens. So
Well, generally do they generally position the camps in the most possibly sheltered area you could up on Everest, obviously, but
yeah, correct. And like camp 2 on Everest is sort of, we call it advanced base camp because it's sort of the only other camp on the mountain that's a bit more stable and protected. Camp 1, camp 3, camp 4, they're really exposed. So you don't usually stay there unless you're actually having to stay there. So a lot of stuff gets stocked at either base camp or camp 2. And those are kind of, yeah, you can go back there for extra gear if you need to, but at any of the other camps, yeah, you can't really leave anything there. So it's mainly the two base camps.
Are there people that just stay at one camp? Like, is there a Sherpa at every camp and they like are there when you get there, or they just walk up like maybe a day before you guys or something? And
So at Camp 2, there definitely is. So there'll be a team that typically stays at that camp for most of the season, but the rest of them, no. Often we'll just climb together when it's time to move. But base camp and Camp 2 always have, Sherpa staff who stay there in case of anything and in case of emergency or anything like that.
Was this 2017 your first summit?
2016, so the year
16.
before, was
So
the first time I summited.
Because like I've watched a Netflix doco as well on Everest, where they're saying like it's overcrowded now. There's queues and stuff like that. Was that a thing back then?
Not so much. Like there were definitely a fair few people. I got lucky with the timing. When I went in 2016, we had a record low number of climbers because of accidents that had happened the prior 2 years.
Yeah. Okay.
So, people weren't super keen to come back, and those of us that were got a pretty clear run, but it's still a factor. And you definitely, unfortunately, it's a couple of teams every season that are always the reason for the overcrowding. If they could not have those teams, they just bring massive numbers of really inexperienced climbers. And
is there a lot of politics in it?
There is, yeah. So
I don't know, because I thought like it's a sport. Like, oh well, I guess all sports have politics, but it's more like a natural. I don't know.
Yeah, it really shouldn't. But being the highest mountain in the world, it's funny, you can go to equally challenging, really high altitude mountains just over from Everest and there'll be like no one. But because it's Everest, it does attract that. And we've seen that over the years. I remember when I first attempted Everest being stuck in base camp for a few weeks because of arguments between the Sherpas and their government, and you do get a lot of that, particularly in base camp. So it's actually
there's a small window to actually climb, isn't there?
Correct. Yes, there's really only, you'll get a couple of windows at the end of May where there might be a week of good weather where the jet stream winds that are usually like too intense, they'll drop and then you'll be able to go up and climb. So everything is planned around that. We have to be positioned, ready, acclimatized by the time that window comes around. So if you're wasting too much time on other stuff, you're not going to be ready for your summit push.
Did you didn't have a time where you attempted and you didn't summit?
Not because of myself, but I first went to Everest in 2014. But there've always been either natural disasters or political issues. So when I went there the first time, we only got to base camp and we'd started acclimatizing. We hadn't really climbed on the mountain, and an avalanche hit that killed.
That was when that massive disaster and all the people died, isn't it? 2014.
Yeah, 2014. So 16 people were killed, and that was a huge accident. At the time, it was the biggest accident on Everest in history, because.
So you were there for that, or base camp?
I was in base camp, and we personally hadn't begun climbing yet. Often you don't until the Sherpas have done some of the things that they want to do, like setting ropes and things like that. We'll usually stay off the mountain until it's clear to go. So we're just in base camp, and I remember we have a head Sherpa in our team who runs the base camp and everything that's happening. And he was getting radio calls, and I remember walking to the mess tent where we have breakfast, and he was saying, "Oh, avalanche." And at first I didn't think anything of it because you hear them go off all the time, but usually they're so far out of base camp, like they're off in the distance. But then, information started unfolding that day about, like, the numbers kept going up. Oh, we think there's been a couple people killed in this avalanche, and then it just kept jumping, eventually up to 16. And so they had choppers going in and out all day to coordinate rescues and recoveries and all that sort of thing. But it was in that icefall section that's the most dangerous. A big serac had dropped off the side of a mountain, and these things are the sides of buildings, like they're huge, and created a massive avalanche. So that was my introduction to Everest, my first season there. That was at the moment, like when I was in the moment, you're just so focused on, all right, what can we do? There's very little that you can, but in what way can we help? And then this became such a political thing. But certainly when I got home, I started to process, all right, where do I go from here? I knew the desire to do it was still there. I didn't necessarily want to quit, but it was very dependent on what happened on the mountain and how the Sherpas felt. And so I didn't really know. That could have been 3 years of work down the drain.
Yeah.
I started reassessing, but I still wanted to climb, but I didn't think it would necessarily be a possibility.
And the cost of it as well would have to come into account.
Absolutely. Yeah. If I couldn't get sponsorship, I wouldn't have been able to return to the mountain, because we certainly didn't have the means to do that. It was the fact that I'd had the support that I was able to go back. So I returned in 2015 to attempt the climb again and retrained up for it and all of that. And then we'd been in base camp again for a few weeks. And I actually remember we got word that, all right, we're going to be going up to Camp 1 tomorrow. And so we had everything ready, got up at, 2:00 in the morning, get ready to climb. And our head Sherpa that year said, we're going to delay it one more day. There's been a lot of heavy snowfall, so that section's even more unstable than usual. So we'll just give it a day. And at midday that day, the Nepal earthquake hit. So, I remember we had lunch as a team in the mess tent, because we're like, okay, we've got an extra rest day. I then went back to my just small personal tent that I've got in base camp. And the ground starts shaking. And I remember thinking, what the hell is that? And then I hear this noise, and I looked out of my tent and I saw this massive avalanche just tearing through base camp, because that earthquake had triggered all of the mountains around Everest to create one big avalanche, which ripped through base camp, killed 20 climbers in base camp. And then at the time we were quite isolated, so I didn't know how big this thing was. And I was then getting reports from home telling me that thousands in Nepal had been killed from it. And at that time it was just like, all right, now we've got to try and help with the situation over here and do what we can. And again, I wasn't really thinking about my climb of Everest anymore.
At that time you wouldn't.
Months later, when I returned home, you start to process that again. But two seasons in a row on Everest that were really full on.
Wow. That would have been frustrating when you got home and could reflect on that 2 times in a row. And you went a third year in a row as well.
I did.
Yeah.
So who knows where it might have gone after that. I thought, I'm going to give this one more 100% crack, and then
and you got the sponsorship to go a third time.
I did. Again, I wouldn't have been able to if I didn't. The upside to it though as well was a massive part of your costs on Everest is the permit fee just to be there. The government charges a lot for that. Because we'd paid it previously, they did let us reuse that. Okay. So we still had to pay a big chunk, but it wasn't as massive. It was more your expedition costs. But we got to reuse some parts, luckily. Otherwise, I don't think I could have gone back. Returned for a third season in 2016. So there was a lot of nerves around what was going to happen that year. And because of those previous 2 seasons, there weren't many climbers who were returning to the mountain.
So it worked out well, I guess, in that sense. There were less people.
It did, They were sort of like, right, we'll see how this season goes, and then we'll come back. So we took advantage of that and decided to go into it. But it was quite risky too, given the country is just unstable in general. The Himalayan mountains are the youngest mountain range in the world, so they're still moving and shifting. So the risk of earthquakes is still there. So it took a lot of weighing up to decide, was it worth going back? I think when you've put that amount of time and energy into it, you do want it to work out. I decided to give it a third attempt and see what happened. So
it took 3 years to get to Camp 1, essentially.
It did. And then I couldn't believe it. We had such a great run of weather and everything came together. You sort of wondering when's something going to hit. But yeah, after that 3 years, I remember being there and I was like, I've spent a lot of time in base camp. I've spent a lot of time looking at this ice fall. And to then actually get to start climbing up into it was pretty surreal. But mentally at that point, I genuinely felt like there's no more prep left to be done. I've left nothing unturned. I'm just ready to go. So I think, it was certainly frustrating after those first 2 seasons to then finally get a chance at it. Was pretty cool. So
Yeah, so you had that wait for the couple of seasons, but how much did you just train without going to base? Like, was it like a year of training again, or did you take 2 years and then attempt it first up in 2014, or like?
Yeah, so
training.
From the time I first set the goal, trained up for about 3 years, then had that first attempt. I then did about close to a year of training, so probably about 10 months, and then had the second attempt, and then same sort of thing. But really did another like intense sort of 6 months. So it was a lot of physical preparation, just staying like still building up between those expeditions. Yeah.
Were you still enrolled? What year would you be in 2016? What year would you have been at school?
So I wasn't in school at 2016. So the way that I did it, I did my senior years through distance education because at that point.
Okay, because I was going to ask how would that have worked? Yeah.
Yeah, I was away so often that I needed almost a specialized program. And I went to a school in Brisbane that was distance ed that dealt with a lot of athletes who had these schedules that they had to be able to work with. So that gave me the flexibility because the Everest climbing season is April and May for 2 months. And so it's like right in the middle of obviously the school year.
Yeah.
So I would often start in November and try and get several months ahead so that I could take April, May off and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's how I ended up doing it in my later years in high school, was having to do distance education to work around that.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. So you get to Camp 1, you finally break through the ice wall, and you're after 3 years of actually getting to base camp, you finally go up. How long was the journey to actually summit? How many days did that take from there? And was it relatively easy compared to having 3 years of that frustration? And like you said before, you already prepped, you had everything you could do.
It was in a way. I think that those years of build up and frustration and not getting a shot at it, when I did finally get my chance, I wasn't going to screw it up.
Yeah.
I think it motivated me to go, when this opportunity comes through, be ready for it. And the first chance that you get, take it and make sure that you perform. So yeah, it was a lot of pressure that I put on myself because it's not like, oh, I'll just come back and have another attempt, or I knew I've got one shot at this and it needs to be done. So yeah, it helped me in a way. I think you can certainly leverage that frustration that you do feel and use it in a positive way. But yeah, it felt really good to be climbing on the mountain, but we spent a few weeks acclimatizing. So we did our rotations across a period of like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
But when we actually go for the summit, you'll then take a week off to rest in base camp, where we're then watching like weather forecasts, seeing when our potential summit day is going to be. And we watch those updates to try and plan it. And then once we're ready to go, it's about a week for the final thing. So from base camp to the summit, you're looking at 5 days, and then it takes a couple days to get back down. So it's a week once you're ready to go.
Okay.
And I've always wondered, do you get to put a flag up there, or?
You don't. You're not allowed to leave anything up there anymore.
Is there nothing up there? Like just nothing?
There is actually from the Nepalese, the Sherpas, there's prayer flags on the summit. So you see them all throughout Nepal, and that's how, once you see those colors, it's pretty surreal when you're on summit day to look up and see the prayer flags hanging off the summit.
Yeah, motivate you even more.
Yeah.
So, I got another question.
Yep.
I've heard that when there's a dead body there, they leave it there. So, and as like you could walk past and see like a frozen foot or something. Is that true?
You do see them up there because you actually can't really bring someone down if they've died.
Is the air too thin for choppers?
Yes, the air's too thin. So the highest rescue you can get is to Camp 2, which is halfway up the mountain. If you're above that, there's no one can come up and rescue you in a chopper. You have to be able to get back to that point, or your team has to be able to get you back there. Once you're above Camp 4, it's very, very rare that anyone's been able to come back down if you're not at least somewhat self-sufficient.
So
Everyone's pretty exhausted. Like once you leave Camp 4 and you're in the death zone, you've got 24 hours effectively. So you've got to be up and out before that time window shuts. There's even people that get back to Camp 4 and they feel like, oh, I'm back, I'm safe, and they've died overnight in their sleep from exhaustion. So that does happen. But yeah, if it's above Camp 4, it's near impossible to get someone's body back down if they've died up there. If it's below that, it's still really difficult, but it's possible. Sadly, we had someone not on our team, but there was an Australian woman that died the same day that I summited. And they were able to get her body back. They were able to bring her back to Camp 2, and then she got flown back to Kathmandu. But yeah, there's a lot of that up there, and it's quite confronting. You do have to be mentally prepared for that.
Yeah, okay. So is it the 4 camps, then summit? Yeah.
Correct.
So
yeah, so you've got base camp, camp 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you've got a summit.
So Camp 4, it's like your body's essentially shutting down. So it's just that window to get to the top, then get back down to a lower altitude.
Exactly. Yep. So your body is shutting down throughout the expedition, and it's almost a matter of timing that as well as you can. But yeah, you've got that 24 hours before your body will shut down. You're just going too long without oxygen, and you've got to be, it's so hard to be aware of the time up there. So that's why having that team around you is really important, because 2 hours will go like that. Or, you know, you don't judge distance as well. You'll go, oh, but the summit's right there and it's 3 hours away.
Okay.
You know, that sort of thing. So it's so easy to chew up time if you do get stuck behind anyone. If there are lines or, you know, something like that, it's, you know, you just chew up so much time. So yeah, you've got to be able to get up and get back down. Most teams will usually have a time cut off, which is not negotiable. They'll say you have to turn around at this time, regardless of where you are, because you might think you're all good, but that exhaustion will hit you really quickly. And once you reach that point, it's hard to come back from. So the woman that died, she had been up in the death zone for like 31 hours, which was way too long.
So is the death zone just Camp 4 to summit, that gap?
Correct. That very final section, once you leave Camp 4 and above, you're in the death zone. And that's when your window starts, your 24 hours. So
how long do they let you stay up at the summit when you get there?
So it really depends on how long it took you to get up there as well. But typically no more than absolute maximum is 30 minutes, but less really, like 20's kind of a good time frame if you're feeling good. So we got to spend like 20 minutes up there, but yeah, you kind of take it in, enjoy it, and then you've got to get back down.
Well, can you see much from up there, or is it just clouds and other what can you see?
Actually, when you're on the summit of Everest, it's funny, all of the highest mountains in the world, they're like really, really far below you, like you're looking down on them. And even the clouds, you're well above the clouds at that point. There's just nothing up there. It's just clear. So it's a pretty crazy feeling being up there.
Far out. And were you on oxygen at all throughout?
Yeah, so I started using oxygen at Camp 3, so obviously one before getting into the death zone. And you start on like quite a small amount, and then you'll slowly put that up a little bit as you start to get higher. Like that's got to be managed quite well. But yeah, from Camp 3 right up to the summit and then back to Camp 3. And then once I got back there, I was able to take the oxygen off and knew I was okay.
Is there ever that fear of running out of oxygen? Because you got to carry everything, or with Sherpas, you've got to carry everything you're taking.
And you have to train your breathing as well. Is that part of your training?
Yeah, it sort of is. So what they'll do in base camp is you run through like how many liters you should be on at this point, and that sort of thing. Like you'll study how the oxygen works and all that sort of thing. I mean, your team will help you as well, but you need to be self-sufficient in case for some reason someone can't help it or check it or anything like that. But yeah, there is a fear of running out. We do everyone's got one spare bottle of oxygen. just in case for emergency. But yeah, you can't carry a lot up there, which is why you can't just like crank it up and off you go, is because we have to carry those. So everyone's got 3. You'll typically try and use 2. But it is this balance of getting enough oxygen to be up there without wasting oxygen. Yeah.
So you summited when you were 19, the youngest Australian to do so, and then you went back there at 21 and then summited from the opposite side. Is it Is it literally the side completely opposite to where base camp is? And is there like a smaller base camp or
the opposite side?
So actually where the base camp is, see, I climbed from the opposite side of the mountain, but where the base camps are, they're almost near each other, and it's just one ridge of the mountain cuts them off from each other. But yeah, you do like a massive hike on the other side to then actually get up onto the north side of the mountain. So it was actually quite tough, even compared to my first summit. Just a lot more endurance required, longer distances, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And what motivated you to do it again after you
going again
after you conquered it the first time?
Yeah, I didn't intend to. And I certainly never thought I'd get the opportunity to go back or anything like that. It wasn't in my mind. It was sort of after about a year, I knew I'd like to do a climb somewhere. And then because I was an athlete and sponsored by Mountain Designs, and because I'd already summited before, they were keen to support me on doing something new, and also testing some of their gear and things like that as well. And I said to them, oh, look, I've always thought about, what the north side would be like, but I never really considered that I'd, climb it. And they said, look, if you want to, you can put that expedition together and go and do it. So yeah, it was kind of just an opportunity that came up, but obviously I had to gear myself up for, another really challenging, tough expedition. But it's quite an iconic side of the mountain, particularly for Australians. For Australians, it's the way that we first climbed Everest, was on the north side of the mountain. Yeah, so there's a few sort of connections there that made me want to go and do it. And I was invited on an expedition with the same company that I climbed with on Everest previously as well.
So what, it pretty much just links up to the same track as the first one, but it's just a lot more to get to that point where it meets up to that track?
Yeah, so a lot of the climbs on the opposite side, but the base camps are pretty close together. But yeah, you're then climbing the other side of the mountain, but you can see down onto the south side. So it's not a massive disconnect. You can definitely see it. But yeah, you've got to, you still fly into Kathmandu like you do for the south side, but you then drive over the border into Tibet. And you actually drive to that base camp, because there's not really a base camp trek on the north side like there is on the south. It's pretty much just wide open plains in Tibet, and then base camps just there. So you actually drive up.
Is it a safer climb on that side? Yeah. Is it?
It actually is, because there's no ice fall. So a lot of people will choose it for that reason. Longer distance, but you're hiking, and it's not climbing through any kind of an ice fall. I would say summit day is tougher on the north side. I think you do a lot of tough climbing on the south side, lower down. On the north side, we had really tough weather, and once you get up onto the northeast ridge, you're really exposed. So all of the winds and things like that are just hitting you.
Wow.
And it's incredibly steep. So I would say summit day on the north side is tougher.
Far out.
And what's next?
I don't have anything planned at the moment, which has actually been quite nice. I did feel like I was really burnt out toward the end of 2018, and even throughout 2019 a little bit. So yeah, I deliberately didn't set myself any particular challenge. Definitely needed some downtime. Didn't do a lot of travel, even sort of pre-COVID, and that. Decided to take a step back from all of that.
So did someone write a book about you, or did you write a book? Someone wrote a book.
No, I didn't write a book. It was actually, so I had a deal with Penguin Publishing, but yeah, they had an author that wanted to write the story. So Sue Williams.
That would have felt pretty cool.
It was crazy. I was like, okay, like you don't really believe it until you see it, sort of thing. But she, throughout this whole process, not long after I started training for Everest, would just come up here and there and do these really in-depth interviews about each of the experiences. And then yeah, when I returned from Everest the first time, we published that. So she was sort of there throughout that whole process, doing these really in-depth, long interviews that she wrote the book based on. So yeah, that was pretty cool as well.
Jeez, can only imagine what that would have been like.
Yeah.
But and then you would have had to go on a lot of like radio stations. You've probably done
Doing
thousands of
interviews,
podcasts
yeah.
and interviews and stuff. And was that at all the spotlight daunting? Did it affect you in any way, or?
You're still young,
Look,
like at that time as well, far out.
Yeah, look, it did, because it certainly wasn't what I did it for, although I'd had some exposure to that when I was younger, just locally. Certainly not on that level, but like even when I did Kokoda and a few other challenges, just where I grew up, locally in Toowoomba, there was some media interest. So I got a little bit of practice dealing with that sort of stuff and doing interviews. But yeah, the level that it happened post Everest was something that I wasn't expecting. And to be honest, it was quite challenging to manage, particularly with how exhausted I was after the climb. I remember I didn't even get to go home. They were like, nope, you got to go straight to Sydney. We got to finish this book. And there were a ton of interviews to do straight off the back of it. It's definitely the most intense right before or right after a major climb. But yeah, it's something that I struggle to manage. I think I enjoy it sometimes, but I also worked out pretty quick, like you have to set boundaries around your own time and energy as well. As much as you might want to share it, you're also like, for me, I didn't want to get stuck there either, living in the past. I wanted to start to move forward and
Yeah, I was
focus
going to
on
ask you that as well. After achieving such a thing at such an amazing thing at such a young age, I don't know, but like I feel like it'd be easy to be like, oh well, I did my life's goal now, so now it's like let's just go on cruise control.
There is a bit of that, and I think it's hard to find a purpose after something like that, especially with really an 11-year build up to doing
well,
the
that
thing
would have
you've
been
always
your sole thinking from
'cause-
Kilimanjaro.
literally, yeah. And so what I wasn't aware of at the time that just naturally happens in that process is it is your identity. You combine who you are with this thing that you're doing, and then all of a sudden that drops off and it's gone. So you're kind of back at ground zero and you're proud of yourself, but you're like, I don't know who I am anymore. And it's really difficult to know, life's just different when you've got that sense of purpose and you're really aligned with what you're doing. So I had to, kind of go back to ground zero and rebuild parts of my life and work out who I am past that.
You're still in your formative years. As like you're still a teen, really, in 2019.
And that makes it even more difficult. I mean, you hear a lot of athletes and different people who have had these massive life experiences. It's challenging even when you're, older, but when you've literally grown up doing this and it's all you really know, so much of your identity is in that. So yeah, it took a lot to sort of be okay with that being finished and then, okay, what am I going to do next and sort of find out who you are again. That was quite challenging.
So what process, like what did you do in that process to kind of find out who you are, set new purposes, new goals?
Well, I think first of all, you've got to learn to be comfortable not necessarily having that thing. Like for me, that was a default, is like I'll set the next goal, and I deliberately went, no, I'm not going to set another goal right now. And I think it's just about doing things that ground you, and sort of going back to, things that were maybe part of your life that you had to sacrifice in order to do that. So for me, that was spending a lot of time with my family. I hadn't gotten to do much of that because of my climbing. So that was like for me, spending time with my mum, my siblings.
Just people. If you had siblings. Did they?
I do. I've got 3 siblings.
Did they take any knack to the climbing?
None whatsoever. They're not into it at all. So, which is actually kind of good though, because I get to sort of have that life away from that world as well. But it's still a work in progress. There's times where you miss it and you miss having that sense of purpose. But I think it's just about like going back to base level, grounding yourself, focusing on simple things. And then from there, you can sort of maybe set another purpose after that. Yeah.
Interesting.
Was going back to like study after you'd done all this, did you do that? Or was it a thought in your head to maybe like find a topic you're interested in and study it, or maybe just become like would you ever start your own expedition or anything like that? Like as a company, sorry.
I definitely considered that. I don't know if that's something I'll do. Like I led a few trips for my father's company, which is not climbing, but they do treks and that. But I felt like I kind of wanted to do something away from adventure and all that sort of thing. Because for me, it was still close to that identity that I used to have. But yeah, it might be something that I do in the future. But yeah, I wanted experiences completely away from anything that I used to be doing. So just did a little bit of general study, not a particular subject, to sort of bridge the time I'd taken away from school and that sort of thing. It was definitely difficult, but it was good to learn to get back into a bit more of a normal rhythm. You get used to the lifestyle of expeditions that's quite fragmented. So trying to sort of have that consistency has actually been quite good for me.
Yeah, I'd like personally, I'm in construction and I've only been doing it for 4 years during while I've been studying as well. And I'm not bored of it, but I'm bored of it. I just want something else. And it's it's sort of that thing. Yeah. It's sort of that thing, like what you were saying, because that's in my algorithm mates, it's construction guy. But now it's don't want to, I'm bored. That's why I'm sort of doing this, because I want to do more things and see how. Well,
do you mean you don't want to just be known as that guy, that single strung banjo kind of thing?
That, and also my life's just repetitive. It's the same stuff. I wake up, go to work, come home. Oh, good job. There's some money, work, and it's on. And then because of how I've been raised, fantastic parents, but that mindset where it's just you just got to work. It sort of scares me and holds me back from doing anything I actually would want to go out and do. I won't say I'd climb Everest, but if, for example, I wanted to properly climb it and was training, I'd have a thought in my mind the whole time going, God, what am I going to do after? How will I get back? And is this going to stuff up my stuff like that? So it's interesting how you've managed all that. And I guess it's the mindset as well from when you were younger.
Yeah, it is a mindset, and that was a concern of mine. Definitely, I'd sort of had two sides to my family, where half of it was very much what you're describing. Family very concerned about, well, what are you going to do and what's going to happen after? And this is so far out of, I guess, normal society, and how are you going to bridge that gap? Which is, it's loving concern. They're worried about how you're going to make your way afterward and that sort of thing. And then I had the other side that said, look, this opportunity doesn't come around a lot, and if this is something you want to do, you do have the opportunity. So that wasn't necessarily an easy decision for me to make, but I just went with my gut on that, which is a really hard thing to do. But I guess throughout the years, I'd built up that skill set. And I just knew, okay, I trust myself to work my way back if this doesn't work out. But that was a big leap of faith as well. And it's definitely taken some time to adjust since being back.
Yeah, because it sounds a bit cringe, but I watched Seaspiracy last week, right? And to me, I saw how they did all this. They went on the Sea Shepherd and went out there and combated illegal fishing and all those activities, hand in hand. I'm trying to think I want to do that, and I really want to try to do that it's a 3-month process or something. But then it's work. So
the toss up.
Yeah, and it might just be my mentality, and I have to change it. And I try to have that once in a lifetime conversation with myself, going this stuff doesn't happen often, and you get to travel to the world, to seas everywhere. You get to meet a bunch of new people. You do something meaningful, but it's I'll have no money. Mum will probably be upset. My grandparents will probably be upset, and I'll come back, and what's going to happen? And it's just it's
interesting to see another perspective.
Yeah. It's good to talk to someone like you that took that leap, and it obviously paid off.
Yeah, it's definitely, look, I struggled with that too. And I think that was my biggest struggle, is feeling like you're letting down, people in your family. There is those pressures there. Often for me, it was at the end of the day though, whose life are you living? And I tend to try and stay true to myself, no matter what. But yeah, I certainly felt those pressures as well. It's a hard thing to balance.
After you came down the first time, random question, what was the first meal you ate? Because I'm assuming you would have had to have eaten like certain foods to not get sick, as well as like to keep your nutrition in balance.
Yeah, correct. So I think, God, I'm trying to remember. It was probably a steak because we're not allowed to eat meat over there. You get quite sick from it if you're not from there. So
Really?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Yep. So
That's random.
everything. Yeah, it
It
is.
was like pre-packaged army meals that you put dry.
Literally, it's these freeze-dried. Yeah. So what we do when you're eating on Everest is, you'll take these freeze-dried meals, you'll boil snow up on the mountain with a jet boil, and then that's your meal. Basically, you pour the hot water in, and that's what you're going to eat. So it's very much like army sort of rations, and then any snacks that we want to bring to base camp.
Yeah, because we did like cadets in school.
It's not the same.
It's not the same thing. I'm relating it to the freeze-dried meals because I like my food.
Yeah, we had freeze-dried meals that would constipate us, so we wouldn't have to go to the bathroom, which was
Oh, that's nice.
yeah, but it was only like a 4-day, 5-day thing.
Yeah, it
so
was.
Obviously, you can't stay constipated the whole time for 3 weeks. You wouldn't be able to train.
No.
Far out.
But so you couldn't eat meat. What about liquids? Was it just water? That was it?
So water, but we'd also you could bring stuff to put in it, like different gels, which is good for you, electrolytes, things like that. So energy gels particularly, it's tough on summit day because you can't really stop. You don't take rest or breaks to drink or eat or anything like that. So it's quite normal to be very dehydrated. But you'll often just take like an energy gel and then off you go. You need really quick, easy access. Like on Everest, not even summit day, but a normal climbing day on Everest, you'll burn 10,000 calories and you just can't get that amount of energy back in. So you're always in a deficit, but you've got to try and eat what you can to try and mitigate that. Normal to lose anywhere from 10 to 15 kilos, mostly of pure muscle.
Really?
By the time you're done, it's just you've worked really hard at altitude. Your body's working hard all the time. Yeah.
All right. Did you ever feel pressure from the sponsorships?
Definitely.
Especially after the fact? Like pressure to do more things?
I did. And I think that contributed to my burnout. And certainly wish I'd stepped back a little bit earlier. But you do feel obligated because you had that opportunity because they supported you.
Yeah.
So I certainly felt that with both sponsors and also my father. And there was a lot of push for me to do a lot of talks, a lot of media engagements, that sort of thing. And I just said yes to all of that because I wanted to fulfill the support they'd given me. But it sort of got to a point too where I, a few years on was both burnt out, but quite unhappy, because my schedule was just filled with that stuff and I was finding it hard to sort of finding a way to move on.
Have time
study
for yourself as well.
Yeah, that's right. So it was definitely a struggle.
When you came down from Everest after you finally summited the first time, was there as much surprise amongst the people that didn't think you'd do it? Considering you climbed Kilimanjaro, then you literally went to base camp twice before that. So it was like, it's happening. But then when you actually got up and came down, were people still surprised or they accepted that, she's going to climb and summit Everest?
No, I don't think people thought I would. And leaving for that third expedition, the final summit, I don't think anyone really cared. I think they'd sort of written it off. And so it went from almost no interest to literally coming back down the mountain. And I finally got access to my phone and my satellite phone, which I didn't have at the time. And it just went off with heaps of people who, I'm certain didn't think that I was going to do it. So that it was funny to see that contrast in going up and it was pretty relaxed. And then I came back down and it sort of blew up. Yeah.
It would have felt good.
Being young for all that hype would be stressful.
What do you
do now for yourself? Now that you said before, it was hard, you burnt out, you had to find time for yourself. So you had the ability to take a step back again. So how did the sponsors react to that? And your father, like you said, you felt pressure from those things. And then what did you do? Like what are you doing now in terms of to like fulfill yourself really, or to fill your day even?
Yeah, so I work I actually work at a law firm, just like in an admin based role. But for me, it was just about going and trying a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I didn't really know myself outside of climbing. So that was kind of the goal of mine, was not to have something strict, not to be stuck to a schedule or a process. I just went, you know what, I'm going to go and experience a few different things and see
Yeah.
what I like and see what I don't like. And that's, you know, sort of still ongoing. I do have a few things that I've said yes to recently coming up in the next couple of years that'll be quite interesting, sort of TV related, but still challenging as well.
Like what? Can you
But yeah,
tell
it's
us, or
only
is it
just, what's that?
like what's coming up in a couple of years? Can you tell us, or is it like
I can't, unfortunately. I wish I
fair?
could. But basically, there's one I'll be part of, a TV show that isn't aired yet.
Yeah, that's
Isn't
exciting.
available. And then another one that currently is. So
Yeah.
not allowed to say much more than that. But there'll be a couple roles that
Big
I get
things
to be
coming.
involved with. And then outside of that, I've really just taken the last couple of years to not do adventures. Work, study, and just experience a lot of different things outside of climbing, which has been really good.
Yeah, perfect.
Do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I think
We'll wrap it up.
we'll wrap it up there.
Well, thank you for coming
Thank you
on.
heaps for coming on. We really appreciate it.
It was a
And,
pleasure.
That's all right.
to get to hear your story. Good luck with
that's
everything you've got going on in the future.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank you.
no, thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll let you know when we.
Yeah, that would be cool.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Thanks.